Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. The crowd was cheering. Trumpets were screaming. Dust filled the air as thousands of boots struck the stone road at the same time. Rome was celebrating another victory. The soldiers marched proudly through the city gates, their armor shining under the sun. Blood still stained their shields. Their swords were sharp, clean, and ready for the next war. To the people of Rome, these men were heroes. They had conquered another land. They had crushed another enemy. But behind the banners, behind the gold and trophies, something far darker followed. Women walked in chains. Some were young, some were old. Some clutched their children tightly, afraid to let go even for 1 second. Their clothes were torn. Their hair was tangled with dust and sweat. Many had stopped crying, not because they were brave, but because they were empty. They did not know where they were going. They did not know what would happen next. They only knew one thing: their old lives were over. In Rome, victory did not end on the battlefield. It continued afterward, quietly, cruelly, and without mercy. For captured women, survival did not mean safety. It meant something far worse. These women were not seen as wives, daughters, or mothers. They were not seen as human anymore. In the eyes of the conquerors, they had become spoils of war, objects to be owned, marked, traded, and broken. Hot irons waited. Chains waited. Ships waited at the ports. And once a woman entered this system, there was almost no escape. History books speak proudly of Roman roads, Roman law, Roman order. But they rarely speak of what happened to the women who walked behind the legions, barefoot and silent, carrying fear instead of hope. This is not a story of glory. This is not a story of honor. This is the story of what victory truly meant for those who lost everything. Before the war came, life was simple for many of these women. They lived in small towns and villages surrounded by fields, rivers, and hills. Mornings began with cooking fires and quiet talk. Children ran barefoot on the ground. Women carried water, baked bread, and told stories passed down from their mothers and grandmothers. Life was hard, but it was theirs. Then the Roman army arrived. First, there were rumors. Travelers spoke of legions moving closer, thousands of men marching as one body, metal shining like fire under the sun. Some people hoped the soldiers would pass by. Others prayed their leaders would surrender to avoid bloodshed. But Rome rarely walked away. The attack usually came at dawn. The sound of horns cut through the air, sharp and terrifying. Before anyone could understand what was happening, the fighting began. Men rushed to defend their homes with weak weapons against trained killers. Many fell within minutes. For the women, the terror was different. They hid inside houses, holding their children close. They listened to screams outside, screams of neighbors, husbands, brothers. Smoke filled the air as roofs burned. The ground shook under heavy boots. Then the doors were broken. Roman soldiers poured in like a flood. They did not see families. They did not see fear. They saw victory. They saw reward. Women were dragged out by their arms or hair. Children cried and clung to their mothers until soldiers pulled them apart. Some women begged in languages the Romans did not care to understand. Others stood frozen, unable to move, unable to scream. By sunset, the town was silent. The dead lay where they had fallen. Fires still burned. And the survivors, mostly women and children, were gathered together under armed guard. Their hands were tied. Their future was sealed. From that moment, they were no longer free people. The Romans counted them like numbers. Strong women were separated from the weak. Young girls were pulled aside. Mothers begged to stay with their children. Most were ignored. Some were beaten for speaking. That night there was no sleep. The women sat on cold ground, surrounded by strangers who spoke a different language and wore armor stained with blood. Every sound made them jump. Every laugh from the soldiers felt like a knife in the chest. They still believed something might save them. Maybe Rome would show mercy. Maybe they would be released. Maybe this was temporary. They did not yet understand Roman victory. For Rome, war was not just about land or power. It was about control, about sending a message so strong that fear would travel faster than the army itself. Captured women were part of that message. As the sun rose the next morning, chains were brought out. The march toward Rome had begun, and with every step forward, the past fell further behind, never to be seen again. The march was long, slow, and cruel. The women walked barefoot on hard roads, sharp stones cutting into their skin. If someone fell, the line did not stop. Soldiers shouted for them to stand. If they could not, they were pulled up by force. Sometimes they were left behind. No one explained what happened to those women. The others did not ask. Fear had already taught them silence. Food was scarce. Water was shared in small amounts. Mothers gave their portions to their children and went hungry themselves. At night, they slept on open ground, surrounded by guards who watched them like animals. Day by day, something inside them began to change. They stopped thinking of themselves as wives, sisters, or daughters. Those names no longer mattered. The Romans had new words for them, words that meant ownership, words that erased their past. When the group reached Roman-controlled lands, officials appeared. These were not soldiers covered in blood. These men wore clean robes and carried writing tools. They studied the women carefully, like buyers at a market. One by one, the women were examined. Hands were checked for strength. Teeth were inspected. Bodies were judged for health. A strong woman could work longer. A younger one could be sold for more. A weak one was considered a burden. The women were not asked their names. Instead, marks were written next to their faces on wooden tablets. Numbers replaced identities. Age, strength, beauty. These were all that mattered now. For the Romans, this was normal. War created profit. Captives became labor. Labor became wealth. This system had existed for generations, polished and perfected. There was no shame in it. There was only business. The women began to understand the truth. They were no longer prisoners waiting for release. They were property waiting for use. Some were sent to farms, others to workshops. Many would never see cities at all, spending their lives in fields under the sun, bending their backs until they broke. But before that happened, there was another step, permanent one. The women were gathered again, this time in open yards near military camps. Fires burned nearby. The smell of smoke and metal filled the air. Soldiers stood around, watching in silence. Then the irons were brought out. Thick pieces of metal, heated until they glowed red. One by one, women were forced forward. Guards held their arms. Some screamed. Some fainted. Some bit their lips until blood ran down their chins. The iron touched flesh. The sound was unforgettable. A sharp hiss, like meat thrown into fire. The smell was worse. Pain exploded through the body, stealing breath and reason. The mark meant ownership. It showed which campaign they were taken from. It told everyone they belonged to Rome. Once marked, escape became almost impossible. Anyone who saw the scar would know exactly what they were, and who had the right to claim them. When it was over, many lay on the ground shaking. Some never stood again. But the march did not stop. There were ports ahead, ships waiting, and futures darker than anything they could imagine. After the branding, the women were no longer marched like prisoners. They were moved like cargo. Chains connected their wrists in long lines so tight that one stumble could pull others down. The soldiers no longer shouted as much. They did not need to. The women had learned the rules. Walk, stay silent, obey. Pain followed every step. The fresh burns on their skin throbbed day and night. Infection began to spread. Some women developed fever. Their eyes looked dull. Their voices grew weak. Still, the march continued. Rome did not stop for suffering. The road led toward the coast. Along the way, townspeople stared as the line passed. Some watched with curiosity, others with pity. A few looked away, ashamed. But no one intervened. Roman power was absolute. To question it was dangerous. At night, the women whispered to each other when guards were far enough away. They shared memories so they would not forget who they were. A mother spoke of her child's laugh. A young girl remembered a river near her home. An older woman described the smell of bread from her village oven. These memories were fragile. Holding onto them hurt almost as much as letting them go. But they were the last proof that their lives had once been real. As the days passed, the line grew shorter. Some women collapsed and never stood again. Soldiers cut them loose without ceremony. No prayers, no burial, just silence and the sound of boots moving forward. The others learned not to look back. When they finally reached the ports, the smell of salt filled the air. Ships crowded the docks, large wooden bodies resting on dark water. To the Romans, these ships meant trade and profit. To the women, they meant the unknown. The ports were loud and chaotic. Sailors shouted. Cranes creaked. Animals screamed as they were loaded onto ships. The women were herded into holding pens near the water, fenced with wood and guarded closely. Here, the waiting began. Days passed without explanation. Food was thrown to them like scraps. Water was rationed. The sun burned their skin during the day. Cold winds cut through them at night. Some women broke completely. They stared at nothing. They did not speak. They did not react when touched. Their minds had gone somewhere their bodies could not follow. Others became angry. They cursed Rome in whispers. They cursed the soldiers. They cursed the gods for abandoning them. But anger changed nothing. The chains remained. Roman buyers began to arrive. They walked slowly through the pens, pointing, discussing, negotiating prices. Fingers lifted chins. Hands pressed arms and shoulders to test strength. Every touch felt like another violation. The women realized something terrifying. Their future was no longer decided by war or fate, but by money. A woman could be sent anywhere. To a distant farm, to a crowded city, to a household where she would be worked until her body failed. Families were split again and again. Sisters were separated. Mothers watched daughters taken away. The screaming never stopped. It only grew quieter as voices became hoarse. And still ships waited. Once a woman stepped onto one, there was no return. The sea would carry her away from everything she had ever known. Hope became dangerous, because hope, once crushed, hurt more than despair. The day the ships were loaded, the air felt heavy. The women were lined up along the docks, their chains clinking softly as they moved. The sea stretched endlessly in front of them, dark and cold. None of them had ever traveled this way before. For many, the water itself felt like a threat. Roman officials stood nearby with lists and seals. Each woman was called forward not by name, but by number. When a number was spoken, a guard pulled her from the line. Some women resisted. Most did not have the strength anymore. Buyers waited at the edge of the dock. Wealthy men in clean clothing, farm owners, traders, household managers. Each looked for something different, but all looked with the same cold eyes. A strong back meant hard labor. A young face meant higher value. Silence meant obedience. When a deal was made, a woman was pushed toward her new owner. Sometimes the buyer was kind in words, promising food and shelter. Sometimes he said nothing at all. The women had learned not to believe promises. For those not sold immediately, there was another fate. They were loaded onto ships in groups, forced below deck into dark, narrow spaces. The air was thick and hard to breathe. Bodies were packed together so tightly that there was barely room to sit. The ship creaked as it pulled away from the dock. Above them, the world continued as normal. Merchants argued. Sailors laughed. Rome grew richer. Below deck, women prayed silently or stared into darkness, counting their breaths. The journey by sea was brutal. Waves tossed the ship, throwing bodies against wood and iron. Many became sick. There was no privacy, no clean water, no relief from fear. Some women died during the crossing. Their bodies were carried above and thrown into the sea without ceremony. The others watched and said nothing. When the ships finally reached their destinations, the women were unloaded like goods. New lands, new languages, new masters. For some, life became endless labor. Sunrise to sunset in fields, mills, or workshops. The body learned pain so well that it stopped fighting it. For others, life became silence. They served households, moving through rooms like shadows. Their scars were hidden under clothing, but never forgotten. Years passed. Some women tried to remember their old lives. Others buried those memories deep, because remembering hurt too much. A few found small ways to survive. Friendships, quiet acts of kindness, moments stolen from suffering. But none were ever truly free. Roman victory followed them everywhere. In the marks on their skin, in the way people looked at them, in the knowledge that their lives had been decided by men who would never know their names. History would never record their stories. No statues would honor them. No poems would remember their pain. Yet they lived. They endured. They carried a truth Rome tried to hide, that every great victory is built on unseen suffering. And long after the cheering stopped, their silence remained. Time did not heal the wounds. It only taught the women how to live with them. Months turned into years. The sharp pain of the iron marks faded into dull scars, but the memory of that moment never left. Every time cloth brushed against burned skin, the past returned without warning. Every command spoken too loudly caused hearts to race again. For many women, survival became a quiet struggle. They learned the habits of their owners: when to speak, when to stay silent, when to move quickly, and when to disappear into corners. Mistakes were punished. Obedience was rewarded with food, sometimes with rest, never with freedom. Some women worked until their hands cracked and bled. Fields stretched endlessly under the sun. Crops had to be planted, watered, harvested. The body aged faster than time itself. A young woman could feel old within a few years. Others served inside Roman homes. They cleaned floors, cooked meals, carried water, and raised children who were not theirs. These women watched Roman families grow and celebrate while their own families existed only in memory. Laughter echoed through halls that never felt safe. At night, when the house was quiet, many lay awake staring into darkness. They thought of home, not the burning villages, not the screams, but the life before. A mother's voice, a shared meal, a moment of peace that once felt ordinary. Some women formed bonds with each other, quiet friendships built from shared pain. A look across a room, a whispered word while working. These small connections were dangerous, but they were also necessary. Without them, the loneliness could destroy a person from the inside. There were moments when hope appeared, kind word from someone unexpected, a small act of mercy, the idea that maybe one day freedom might come. But hope was fragile. Most learned to keep it hidden because losing it again hurt too much. Rome called this order. Rome called this civilization. But for the women who lived inside this system, it felt like a slow death that never quite ended. Some women lived long lives in captivity. They grew old under Roman roofs or in Roman fields. Their bodies survived, but their stories stayed trapped inside them. They were never asked what they had endured. They were never asked what they had lost. And yet they continued, not because they were weak, but because survival itself was a form of resistance. Every breath taken was a quiet refusal to disappear. They remembered even when no one else did. The years passed, but the shadows of that first march never left the women. Even in old age, the memory of chains scraping across their wrists, of screams echoing in burning towns, of the hot irons branding their skin, haunted them. These were not stories told for sympathy. They were lived realities etched deep into the body and soul. Each scar, each limp, each trembling hand was a testimony to the cruelty they had survived. Some had learned to speak again, slowly, cautiously, but their words carried the weight of decades. Others spoke only to themselves, whispering names and memories to keep the past alive. In the corners of Roman houses, in quiet fields, they remembered their families, their homes, their freedom. These memories were both pain and power, proof that Rome had never fully claimed their spirits. The world around them changed. Rome expanded. Cities rose. Markets thrived. Statues celebrated emperors and generals. Scrolls recorded victories and conquests. But the lives of the women who had been carried in chains were erased from history. They became invisible. Yet invisibility did not mean nothingness. These women carried their past into every task, every movement, every glance. A mother who had lost her child in the march taught another's child to read. A woman who had endured branding whispered survival secrets to younger captives. They became living proof of resistance in the quietest form. Enduring, remembering, surviving. Some women died quietly, unmarked by history but deeply marked by life. Others found ways to escape, sometimes into forests, sometimes into towns that did not know their pasts. Freedom came rarely and unpredictably, but when it arrived, it was both terrifying and beautiful. And even then, the world never truly forgave them, because what Rome had taken could not be replaced. Childhoods, families, innocence, all gone. All that remained was memory and the unyielding will to continue living. Centuries later, the marks remain. Not the physical ones, which faded with time, but the lessons etched into human history. That victory, when it crushes others, is never pure. That power wielded without mercy leaves scars invisible to the proud and victorious, but indelible to those who suffered. The women of Rome's conquests were more than victims. They were witnesses. Witnesses to the cruelty of men in power, to the depths of human suffering, and to the fragile, stubborn persistence of life. And in the silence that followed each day's toil, in the quiet corners of the world, they spoke, not with words, but with endurance, not with cries, but with survival. For generations to come, their echo would remain, unseen, unheard, but never erased, because the truth of what they endured could never be fully silenced. And that truth was the real legacy of Roman victory.